Hi, this is Rich Girard. As you know, our mission here at Girard at Large is to connect local people, places, and things by bringing you news from our own backyard. Did you know that GoffstownToday.com has a similar mission? So when we want to know what's happening in Goffstown, Ware, Dunbarton, or New Boston, we go to GoffstownToday.com.
Hi, this is Bill Wynne, publisher of GoffstownToday.com. If it's happening in Goffstown, Ware, Dunbarton, or New Boston, even in Pinardville, you can find out about it on GoffstownToday.com. If we know about it, you should too.
Welcome to this YouTube video that we were able to put together thanks to our partnership with Bill Wynne at GoffstownToday.com. We hope you enjoy what you're about to see.
All right, Girard Large time is 6:37, and joining us now in studio is Susan Hood. She is a former teacher at the Mountain View Middle School in Goffstown and has something to say about the controversy over there. She is one of many that we have heard from and who have reached out to us about the problems in that school, and we appreciate the fact that she has been willing to come and speak with us live. Good morning, Susan. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine.
All right. So you sent me a whole lot of stuff, which I reviewed over the weekend. And I just, first of all, for our audience, how long have you been a teacher?
I was a teacher for 17 years.
So you were a teacher of 17 years. And how many of those years were at the Mountain View Middle School?
13.
So you were at Mountain View Middle School for 13. Now, were those your first 13, your last 13?
No, I had 3 years in Merrimack, and then the rest were in Goffstown.
You had 3 years in Merrimack and the rest were in Goffstown. I'm going to have Dave come over and adjust your mic a little bit, Susan. We've been scrambling here this morning, as you know about. Fade out. Oh, yes. So let's make sure that... how's that? Actually, bring it up, Dave, so she doesn't have to lean down to talk into it. Better? There you go. Yeah, I think that's good. All right. So, and what subject did you teach?
While I was at Goffstown, I was actually, most of the years were a 7th and 8th grade science teacher. 7th and 8th grade science.
Mm-hmm. Hey, my father taught 7th and 8th grade science at Southside for many years.
Oh, great grades.
Oh, yeah, there's just something about having hundreds of kids that age in one building that just makes for an interesting day. All right, so by your estimation, there are two things that we kind of want to discuss with Susan here. We want to get sort of an overview of the problems in the building, but also we want to really kind of delve into whether or not the superintendent's office and the school board have been intentionally deaf to the pleas of teachers there. So the problems as they've surfaced now and the controversy that seems to swirl around the principal, Jim Hunt. What sort of issues existed at the school before he arrived, and what sort of issues exist at the school now that he's been there since, what, 2007?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit before that he came in. But Rose Colby was the principal before Mr. Hunt became principal at the Mountain View. And I was there probably, I think, 10 years under Rose Colby. Things were great. It was a community family. She retired, and I was on a leave of absence for a year. I went out to Colorado, and I was a teacher in an Indian reservation in Ignacio, Colorado. Came back, saw that Rose was retiring, and they hired Mr. Hunt as the principal there.
Okay. So what sorts of changes started to take place in the building after the hiring of Mr. Hunt?
Well, we had the big teachers meeting before the students come in, and Mr. Hunt made it pretty clear that this was a business. It was not the family kind of community that was under the previous principal, and that there would be changes, you know, in the building. So things became a little less family-oriented, community-oriented, and more business. We're going to look at test results, curriculum, and that's what we're focusing on.
Were the test scores of the kids in Mountain View subpar? Was there a concern over academic performance in the school?
I don't think there was a concern over it, but at that point, there was testing going on. There was a lot of pressure on the school systems for higher test scores.
Okay. And so what sorts of changes began to take place in the... Now, nobody really likes change, but what was it about the changes... Well, I guess what changes took place, what was it about the way the changes were done that you had difficulty with?
Well, the assistant principals left too. So it wasn't just a change in principal.
So changing the whole management structure.
There was a whole, right, exactly.
Now, did they bring in, how many assistant principals were there?
There were two, well actually there were three. One was a special ed coordinator who they decided they didn't need her as the third, and so Miss Davis and Mr. Deppy became the assistant principals. After 1 year, Miss Davis left. After the second year, under Mr. Hunt, Mr. Deppy left.
Now,
So
were these people who had worked in the building and got promoted from within, or were they brought from the outside of the building in?
the new principals or the ones that left?
Right.
The new principals that came in, that took the assistant principals that took the places?
Well, hold on. When Mr. Hunt came in, did he come in, were there existing assistant principals that were there, or did he come in with new principals?
No, the existing assistant principals were there.
Okay. So they were there when he was promoted, and within 2 years they were both gone.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Right. So
Now,
there was a
why
change.
Did they leave? Did they just retire, or did they move on?
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't want to speculate on why.
Okay. All right. So what sorts of changes began to take place?
Well, within the culture and climate of Mountain View, it became more tense. There was some discipline problems with students. Not everybody was in agreement on how they were being handled. It was just, it wasn't that, you didn't feel as though you could go to administration with a problem. You felt as though you needed to deal with it, keep it quiet, or just ignore it.
Okay, so it was, now, how broad was this perception in your view of the availability of the administration to assist with various issues?
I think it was throughout the whole school.
Okay. Now, in addition to yourself, I mean, I've been made aware of a handful of other teachers who over the years have resigned from Mountain View like you did, basically to get out of the building because you couldn't take the stress of it anymore. How many, are you aware of how many people have left Mountain View since Mr. Hunt came to the school?
Well, from what I understand, about 75% of the staff on the first year that he came had left. I'm not exactly sure what the numbers are, but there were quite a few
So
teachers
there's been some significant turnover.
Significant, yes.
All right, Toronto Arch time is 6:45. We're with Susan Hood investigating the difficulties of the Mountain View Middle School. We'll get into some of her personal story and what took place with her right after we check traffic and weather. Susan, in reviewing the materials that you sent to me, there were several correspondences between you and the superintendent of schools. There was an attempted correspondence that you made to the school board that was blocked from getting to the school board by then chairman, what was his name, Allard. Last name was Allard. And a lot of the materials that you included had some very unflattering things that were said about you and your performance as a teacher. And I wonder how it was that a veteran teacher like yourself came to be called what's known as a teacher in need of improvement. You know, you've been teaching for more than a decade when all of a sudden you were found to be somehow deficient and subjected to various evaluations, etc., etc. When did this all come about?
Well, it came about the second year that Mr. Hunt was principal. I had to put together what they call a professional profile, and it was 4 different write-ups that finally had to go through mediation in order for me to get this approved. I was kind of seeing there was something there was a small problem going on. I had a meeting with Mr. Hunt with a parent, and felt that the meeting didn't go as well as it could have. I wasn't called in advance about this. He had known previously, and I wrote a letter to him expressing that I didn't feel that the meeting had been that I'd been prepared and known ahead of time.
And this was a meeting with a parent who had a concern over how you disciplined their child, is that right?
Right, it was on the playground.
What was the child doing?
He was hanging on a basketball hoop, and I had told the kids it was dangerous. The basketball hoop was pretty rusty, and had told the kids that if they were hanging on it, they were going to lose 5 minutes of their recess.
So you enforced your 5-minute rule, so to speak, and this angered the parent.
It did.
And the parent came in to talk to the principal.
Right, I guess previously she had written a letter, and he had seen the letter, told her that he would love to talk to her ahead of time, and then I got pulled into the meeting at some point.
Okay, and this was the event, the triggering event that started the downward slide of your teaching career, I guess, is that the way to put it?
I very accurately, yes.
Okay, so what happened in that meeting that you felt the need to write in? If you want, I mean, I can take the stuff that you've given me and I can post it up on our blogs and things like that, Bill.
Well, she was upset because I had said, you know, and I said it in kind of a gesture, kind of, you boo-hoo, you lost 5 minutes, guys. And it wasn't just her son, it was a couple of students that were doing it off and on. And she felt that I was being too sarcastic, and I explained to her it wasn't in that kind of way. We're in middle school, you have to have a little sense of humor here. And anyway, I had had her son the year before, and there had been a few things here and there that we didn't always agree on. And anyway, Mr. Hunt, I was in that meeting for about a half an hour. Mr. Hunt didn't really stop it. It was kind of a hostile environment, and I felt that when I left, that at some point in time the meeting should have been stopped. She was going into the previous year instead of sticking to what the issue was at the moment, and wrote him a letter expressing that I felt that he had let this hostile environment continue.
So in other words, he was kind of letting you get beanbagged by the parent in the meeting while he kind of observed it.
Yes, he wrote little notes going on and never really stopped it.
So you sent him a protest letter, you know, to sort of share your views on that. What happened following that?
After that, I had asked, well, then we started getting into this profile where I needed to write a profile for my next 3 years recertification.
Now, what is a profile? I mean,
it's a professional profile. You write components of what you're going to accomplish in the next 3 years as a teacher, as a professional.
Now, is this something that every teacher does?
Every teacher does, yeah.
Okay.
In their next recertification. And he wanted me to put in this component 4 that I was low end on my communication with parents, and I felt as though he was drawing on this one meeting, and I didn't want to put this into my profile. And he was insisting, and I kind of fought it, and I ended up having to go through mediation through different,
So basically he wanted you to include something in your profile that said you needed to improve your skills communicating with parents, and you thought that that was not an accurate representation of your professional skills, and you didn't want to do it, and there was a fight between you and the principal. Did you get the union involved?
I just did initially, yes. I did have the, I wrote the letter and had the union, I sent a copy to the union, and apparently I think that there was some communication between the union and the principal. I don't know for sure because I wasn't in on that whole deal.
Okay, so now when you say you went to mediation and all this over the write-up of your profile, what does that mean? How do you end up in mediation, and what's the outcome of that?
Well, it just means that I had another supervisor look at it, sit down, and kind of iron this out, since Mr. Hunt and I couldn't seem to come to agreement with it.
Now, when you say another supervisor, is that someone in the superintendent's office? Is that somebody else? Or?
It happened to be the curriculum coordinator, who is in an administrative job at Mountain View. She later became the assistant superintendent.
She later became the assistant superintendent. What was the finding of that? What was the finding of that mediation?
Well, we agreed, you know, that, you know, this kind of language was put in. my next step would have been to the superintendent's office. I don't think they wanted it to go that far, to be honest with you. So it got ironed out and it got signed by everybody, but it took a long period of time.
Okay. And as we take a look at this, so you agree to in some form have this better communication with parents thing as part of your recertification plan? Is that what it's called? Your professional profile?
Right.
And then what happens from there?
Well, I also asked, because I could see that Mr. Hunt was my direct supervisor, that things just weren't going to go as smooth as I'd like. So I asked for a change of supervisor.
Now, well, how do you do that in a middle school? How do you have a change of supervisor? Because forgive me, but my understanding of how schools work is that the principal of the school generally interacts with the faculty. The assistant principals of the school generally interact with the students. So if my understanding of that is correct, how do you get a different supervisor within the building under those circumstances?
Well, there are the 3 administrators who share the responsibility of your observations, writing up your professional profiles, and they share the responsibility of doing
so
that.
It wasn't a request that couldn't have been accommodated.
Right, exactly. It was accommodated. Later on, Mr. Hunt came to me and told me that that he was no longer going to be my supervisor in this area, and it was given to the special ed administrator.
It was given to the special ed administrator.
Right.
Okay. And what was that person's name?
That was Heather Worthen.
Heather Worthen. So how did you and Heather get along as we were doing this?
We get along fine.
Okay. And then what happened? Because in reading the paperwork that you've sent me, I mean, this thing got pretty ugly.
It got very ugly.
So, I mean, now how did you get from this point, from doing your professional plan for, your 3 years out, to a teacher in need of, actually, you know what, Dave? I think because he can't run any commercials, why don't you give me like a minute, and then we'll, run our 56 schedule at like 59.
You got it.
All right. So, sorry, we're on the fly here. So how did we get to a point where things are going along okay, and now suddenly there's another issue? What happens? It was another incident disciplining a student, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, there was an issue I got called in because I had put my clipboard down too hard on my desk. He
Put
came
your clipboard down too hard on your desk.
Exactly, and I said, "Oh, gosh, I wasn't aware."
This was from a student that they refused to name to you.
Right. They said a student came into them and said that they were upset that I put my clipboard too hard on my desk. So
And they didn't tell you what period, they didn't tell you what class, they didn't tell you what student, they gave you no information.
No information. And I immediately said, let's have a meeting with the student. My goodness, this is something I want to get straightened out. I didn't realize. Let's get parents and let's do this, let's do that.
And I remember my 7th grade English teacher, Mrs. Mayotte, who I think, she's a different name now, I think she's still teaching in Manchester schools. She was like a samurai with her pointer. She actually used to smack it on kids' desks. She broke it one day, I think, on my desk, and you were worried about a clipboard.
Right. I mean, I wanted to rectify whatever this was, and they said, no, we're not going to give you the name of the student, but we'd like to come in and do observations on you. I said, fine, come on in anytime you want. So I think in a period of a couple of weeks, they came in 5 different times. And the outcome in the next meeting was that they wanted me to do these little activators called Do Nows, which is more on an academic end. And fine, I went to different teachers. I looked in books to find out what would be the best Do Nows for my class, and did exactly what they asked me to do.
We are in studio this morning with Susan Hood. She is a former teacher at the Mountain View Middle School here in Goffstown. And we are continuing with the story of what happened to her. And it's a story, and how do I say this? This is not just a story about her. Girard at Large has received numerous contacts from folks in that building, both presently and formerly in that building, with similar stories. And we want to thank Susan for being willing to come forward and tell her story, because I think it illustrates the strife that may in fact exist at Mountain View. So, Susan, there was a clipboard incident. You were vicious with the clipboard, slamming it on your desk too forcefully, alarming an unnamed student.
Clipboards have rights too.
Alarming an unnamed student who
That happened to me. Look how I turned out.
there you go.
You're
never
the
got over
Girard
it.
at Large clipboard.
I never got over it. That's me.
And you asked for a meeting with the student and the administration and the student's parents to try to make sure you understood who, what, where, when, why you were denied this opportunity. Now you are in for multiple evaluations. What happens there? Oh, you had some kind of whatever adjustment to your curriculum. What did you call it? Do it now?
Yeah, do nows.
Do nows.
So I came up with some great little do nows and asked at that time, because of other little incidences that were going on, whether or not this was kind of the beginning of, am I going to be a teacher in need of improvement here? And the reply was, not at this time, but I can guarantee you 2 to 3 months from now. Okay. So time goes on, and at the time we're in a big...
So they're being not so subtle about the direction they're bringing you in.
Right. They're not being subtle, but they're not really coming out there.
Now, is there anything about the test scores from the kids in your classrooms, whether it's the tests that you administered or any of the standardized tests that show that your kids were underperforming in the school, underperforming versus their benchmark statewide? I know they can isolate all that stuff.
Not that I was aware of.
Not that you were aware of. So there's no evidence that what you're doing is academically deficient in any way. Your classroom management skills to this point had not been questioned. How many years of teaching?
I think at that time it was about 11 years.
So 5-minute recess shortening and a vicious clipboard assault on a clipboard.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. And the school at that point, though, is being accredited, and there's a lot of people coming in and out of the building, so I don't think at that point it would have been a good time to really start making problems with the staff. Things were pretty even keel at that point. After the accreditation team left was when I was informed that I was going to be a teacher in need of improvement. And initially it was an 8-page instructional classroom management that I had to follow, which I got the union involved in, and it was cut down into 4-page with doing reflections once a week and an observation every month, but there were pre-observations and post-observation meetings. And
okay. And I don't really want to get lost in all of the weeds here, because I think what's important too is at some point you started to reach out beyond the union and started to reach out beyond the administration of the building to try to draw the attention of higher ups, for lack of a better term, to what was happening in the school. Because at the same time, were you aware of other teachers who were going through this at the school at the same time that you were?
yes, there were other problems. I'm not sure exactly what teachers were in need of an improvement plan. It's one of those situations that you don't really like other staff members to know about. It's an embarrassing situation. I'm pretty open. I felt like, people needed to know what was going on my end. Other people tend to try and keep it like, not letting anybody know what's
But you
going
were
on.
aware of other teachers who were going through similar
Situations, problems, yes.
Okay. Now, when you tried to sort of get this out of the building, so to speak, who did you go to? How did you get there? And what was the response that you got?
Well, I actually went to the superintendent, Stacy Buckley, who was now a new superintendent, and talked to her about it and had 2 or 3 meetings with her through the next probably 18 months over the situation. I also had Mr. Bulke, who was the assistant superintendent, who was supposed to oversee my plan, and we had meetings once a month on it. So in those meetings, I was pretty verbal about what was going on, what I felt about. I wrote letters, which I'm sure you read, feeling that it was unfair. The supervisor, who was a brand new assistant principal, who had been a previous teacher at our school, who had no experience in this whatsoever, and I'm not even sure whether or not she was fully accredited as an assistant principal, was the person who was in charge of it. And at some point in time, I even asked to have a new supervisor that had more experience, because her complaint with me was that she didn't feel that I was vested into it, even though I was going to the meetings, even though I was going according to their plan. It was very subjective on what she felt my investment into it was.
Well, I guess, from my own point of view, it's hard to be invested in something that I don't think is necessary, and I feel like I have to go through the motions in a hostile environment just to try to hang on to my job.
Well,
Okay.
but I tried to, work it.
So you went to the assistant superintendent, you went to the superintendent, you had these discussions about what was happening in the building, and what was their response to that?
They didn't change anything. Sometimes I didn't get any response. Other times I got a letter back saying no, the teacher need improvement plan was not going to be stopped. It wasn't going to be, the supervisor wasn't going to be changed. It was what it was.
Okay. And you got sick of that, I guess, and then you decided to try to reach out to the school board.
Right. Well, it wasn't until I decided that I could see the writing on the wall. No matter what I did, it wasn't going to be good enough. So I decided at some point to just go ahead and resign. I resigned in January and made the decision,
January of 2010, is that right?
Right, and continued to teach until June. In March, I did send, because I had to have these observations still, even though I had resigned, and the write-ups on them were just terrible. I decided at some point that I was going to let the school board know what was actually being written in these observations, even though I had actually resigned and said uncle.
Do you get the feeling that those observations were written in such a way as to prevent you really from taking them to court, and try to give them the basis to say that you were just a terrible teacher and yak, 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 yak?
It could have been. I mean,
as a tenured teacher, the likelihood they could actually fire you, I think, is pretty remote. But
well, initially I kind of saw the writing on the wall here and asked to have someone else in on these observations, someone who was objective in what they saw. Or experienced, and I was denied. And I went through the union and I went through the superintendent and said, we have a personality problem here, and I don't think that it's going to be an objective view on what's going on here. Could I have someone else also in the room during these observations? And I was denied both ways. So what they wrote was what they wrote. Now, I made comments afterwards on these, but the initial observation's still there in my file with the comment attached to it.
So there was something too that I thought interesting in your paperwork, and that was, it seemed that the principal of the school was keeping an entirely separate file on you that was not known to you or to anybody else, and had all kinds of stuff in there that it was almost a little J. Edgar Hoover stuff going on here. Is it? Maybe you're not the one to ask, but doesn't everything like that belong in your master personnel file? What kind of information was he keeping on you there that was being withheld from you and from in the district itself?
Well, if there was a parent complaint or a parent had written a letter, I wasn't, and this did happen in my situation, I had no idea that that was even there. Once again, you know, sometimes there's not always an agreement on the way things are handled. Parent has a complaint, you sit down with the parent, you sit down with the administrator, and you iron things out. Apparently, parent had written a letter, not happy with something. I can't actually even remember what it was. And later on, I find out that I was never been aware of it, never received it, and that was kind of the evidence that was used in saying, yes, this supports this teaching improvement plan that we need to have around. So later on, other teachers found out that there were also letters that were being held, files on them too, yes.
Yeah, interesting, because you know what, in most cases you can't get parents to pick up the phone, never mind actually spend the time to write a letter of complaint. Interesting. So you tried to get this to the school board. You resigned, you sent in your letter of resignation in January 2010. In March you sent a letter to the school board because you wanted them to be what, aware of what was happening in general with your situation in particular. What was your goal? What did you do, and what was the response?
Well, I was very upset with the observations and the comments made. I sent them copies of the observations and my comments and a few letters that I had written to the superintendent and the assistant superintendent.
So in effect, you were kind of blowing the whistle on the whole deal.
Well, I kind of like, here it is, folks, and I had already resigned. Why was this continuing? And sent them to the superintendent, put them in their little slots. There was, you know, each member had a copy of letters and observations, and I got a letter from the chairman, Mr. Allard, saying that he wasn't going to distribute them, that he felt that it was a union problem. So he pulled everything, and I got a letter from Ms. Buckley that stated that it was inappropriate, that once again this was a union issue, and I later on did send them to the homes of the school board members 2 days before I actually left school. I had a situation where I was being recertified, and so I decided that I better be careful in that Mountain View Middle School needed to sign off on my recertification for the next 3 years, or I would have lost my teacher's license too.
Have you been able to find work since leaving?
No, not full-time work. I've done a couple of, well, I've done one long-term sub position, and I do day-to-day sub positions in different districts.
Have you had any problems with any of your long-term substitutions, any sort of classroom management, academic performance? Before Mr. Hunt showed up at Mountain View Middle School, had you in your 13 years, 14 years by the time he showed up in teaching?
Yeah.
Have you ever dealt with parent complaints before?
Well, you know, every once in a while you have a parent complaint. Of course you deal with it, and, you know, I mean, life goes on, and everybody leaves hopefully happy, and everything's been resolved.
So the same sort of issues. Nothing really changed in sort of like your day-to-day school life with, you know, parents maybe having a complaint about how you handled something, people having observations, but what changed was how it was handled. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, how things were handled.
And as somebody with, you know, better than a decade's worth of experience in the profession, at different school districts under different leadership, have you ever seen anything handled in the manner that this one was?
Never, never. If a parent emailed me, he would get the copy of it ahead of time and would have a call into the parent before I even saw emails. Sometimes that happened in 2 different occasions. Never. Usually administrators work with teachers. I felt as though the administration here was actually working against you.
Would your style of discipline, because since a lot of Would people say that maybe you're strict?
No,
Kinda
not at all.
Tough butt? No?
No, not at all.
So, yeah, I guess hanging from the basketball hoop and having your recess cut by 5 minutes isn't exactly Genghis Khan, huh?
No, I don't think so.
It's horrible. How can anybody function in such austere conditions as
Well, now,
5 minutes up?
This clipboard incident really bothers me. Can you think of any time where you were abusive to a clipboard?
I don't know. I just heard from the Clipboard Rights League, and they want to talk to you after the show here. So
Is Jeff sending texts again?
Your day's not over yet. So
In all honesty, I was surprised. I was surprised. I mean, at some point, could I have? I'm not sure. I don't remember the actual incident. But the bottom line is, whatever it was, I was glad to sit down and talk about it with the student.
Now,
I mean, these are 13-year-olds. I'm not sure. It was my desk. It wasn't even like that student's desk.
Now, why do you think, with 17 years of experience, that you've been unable to find another teaching position here in the state of New Hampshire?
Well, the economy's, it is what it is. I mean, teachers have taken, excuse me, it's teachers. Budgets are strict. They're constricted. As you know, Manchester right now is trying to go through their budget. 143 teachers that are.
So what you're saying is you resigned with nearly 20 years of service, understanding that it was going to be very difficult for you with this budget environment to find another job in the state of New Hampshire.
Absolutely.
So but you did have some interviews. What happened following those interviews? Do you have any reason to believe that the Mountain View Middle School or the Goffstown School District is sharing negative information about you that is handicapping you in the job market?
Well, I feel that way. I had 2 interviews, very excited. One from Bow and the other one was from Allenstown. They were very excited. I'm highly qualified in 7th and 8th grade. I have a special ed certification.
Now, highly qualified, so our listeners understand, to be designated highly qualified is a specific designation that you actually have to earn. You're not just saying that you're good, you're saying that you've been through extra training that makes you a highly qualified educator, correct?
Yes, yes.
So here you are, highly qualified, and you can't get anywhere.
Exactly. So I had interviews, very excited, background, reference checks. With 13 years at Mountain View, you can't get around all that. And got a voicemail and a letter stating that they were no longer interested. Now, it was very interesting that I couldn't even get on a sub list. Now, they let parents substitute. I couldn't even get on a sub list in Bow.
Susan, we're sorry that our time is out, but we're sorry that you've had to go through this, and we appreciate your speaking out. We are going to continue to try to bring our audience information like this about what's happening at Mountain View Middle School and in Goffstown in general. If there's additional information, we'll be glad to do what we can to help it see the light of day.
Thank you very much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Susan Ryan.